Over the last few weeks we've seen rapid progress with the launch pad itself, which will support the vehicle during its flight campaign. The launch table that is currently residing at the build site, will eventually be moved to the orbital launch pad, and placed on top of this white-legged structure here. Not a lot of updates on that, but we have seen hydraulics going in, so work is continuing. Here is the massive integration tower, which will be used to stack the Starship vehicle, on top of the Superheavy. That we believe will stand around 144 meters in height. Eventually, this tower will also be used to catch the returning booster, as well, and we've been watching the construction closely to see hints of how this may occur. The fifth steel section of this orbital launch tower was lifted, on Wednesday, and was stacked late in the afternoon. And on Friday morning, the sixth tower section was rolled over to the launch site. Seventh section of the integration tower, which were then assembled on the build site. That should leave, I think, just one more, 8 in total. While all this section stacking has been showcasing this great infographic, which has been keeping us up to date on the status of the launch tower itself. That has been very handy for everyone following that so closely. Beside the orbital launch tower we have the orbital tank farm, which is made up of 3 cryogenic liquid oxygen tanks, 3 liquid methane tanks, a single nitrogen tank, and then a non-cryogenic water tank. This week, one of these cryo tank shells, which will help insulate the cryo tank underneath, was lifted over to the orbital tank farm for a presumed test fit. Eventually, it will be placed over one of the GSE tanks. The stacking of a third cryo shell began last weekend as well. There is also a large 12-meter water tank here built with the same methodology of the cryo shells. That water tank was rolled to the tank farm last week and is already in position right here. The test tank known as BN 2.1 had another run successful test this week as well. The test seemed to proceed through its various stages uneventfully, so that is a good sign. A new foundation for an unknown structure is in progress right near the launch tower. No idea what this is for, but if you have any thoughts, let me know. We'll keep an eye on that. Over at the build site, Booster 2 has had quite the week and we have a nice set of updates here to share. Booster 2 was lifted to the front of the high bay, to stack the LOX tank onto the thrust section. Elon Musk shared a photo here during the lift and maneuvering of the thrust section, onto a stand in the high bay. Once the LOX tank is stacked on top, it completes the lower section of the booster with the next step of stacking the methane tank. These two sections will then be mated together to complete the whole booster. Furthermore, the forward dome sleeve, which is the section that sits right on top of the booster stack, was flipped. Now just take a look at this. These holes that we see here are the mounting points for the 4 grid fins. If you look closely though, the arrangement is not the same as what we've always expected. This is SpaceX's Falcon 9. The grid fins are placed equally around the vehicle 90 degrees apart. Wherever we've witnessed the Falcon 9 come back and land, we see this clearly. We've always just assumed the Superheavy booster would be similar, but it isn't. These holes are not equally spaced by 90 degrees. Instead, there are 2 grid fins on each side spread 60 degrees apart, with there being a 120-degree space between the 2 sides. We're just assuming that the main reason for this is to provide more space, for the booster to come in to be caught, without the grid fins being in the way of the tower. Big thanks there to Jack Bayer with NASA Spaceflight out there capturing these images. That is a significant find right there. The ring section started off with these massive square cutouts. And then these reinforced plates were inserted for the fins to mount into. On Monday the 14th of June, this piece was added here. Now many have been thinking, this will be a part of the system used for catching the booster out of the air. That is a total guess at this point, but we may see some significant reinforced parts be added in this area if that is the case. Remember, back in April, Elon Musk specifically tweeted that the load points will just below the grid fins. Remember though that the shock absorption will not actually be on the booster itself, but instead it will be built into the tower arms. It makes sense for the booster to be as simple as possible, and then SpaceX can build that complexity into the launch tower. Starship number 16 has been rolled out of the high bay on Wednesday, and taken up to sit close by Starship 15. Soon after, Elon announced on Twitter that they might use Starship number 16 on a hypersonic flight test. He didn't indicate whether that could occur before or after SN20's orbital flight, so a timeline on this is unknown. Having a Starship fly fast enough to exceed that barrier which is typically anything between Mach 5 and Mach 10, or a minimum of around 6,200 kilometers per hour will certainly be a first. That is faster than a Falcon 9 after its entry burn. We are just assuming that would still attempt to bring this back to land on the landing pad, but perhaps they could choose to fly much further and ditch it in the ocean. What do you think? There were also 2 Raptor engines delivered to Starbase last weekend on Saturday morning. These were Raptor number 72, with the label Velociraptor, as well as Raptor 74, called Plaid Mode, obviously inspired by Tesla's launch of the Plaid Mode Model S last week. SpaceX recently closed on the purchase of Massey's gun shop and range on the way to Starbase. Sources close to the deal have indicated that this location will be the Raptor facility, and possible uses may include repair, rebuild and testing of rocket engines. An interesting graphic got some attention from SpaceX COO Gwynne Shotwell footage, while she was doing her commencement address with Northwestern University, early in the week. Here we see her strolling down the SpaceX factory in Hawthorne, California. If you look closely at this point in the speech, you can see on a board that it says Starship Orbital Launch. Firstly, the countdown, which reads 25 days, 7 hours, and 30 minutes. Many have been suggesting this as a timeline for the launch of Booster 2 and Starship 20, however, this video was pre-recorded when July 1st was the goal for the first orbital flight. Plans have obviously now changed because, with the massive amount of work to be done, that goal is now impossible. The board also shows which Raptors have or haven't been shipped to Starbase. It shows in green that the center cluster of Superheavy engines and 2 Raptors for Starship have been shipped. How crazy is that? So yes, quite a lot there around Starship development. Progress is super quick. It will be interesting to see what Starbase looks like in another month. This week, SpaceX founder Elon Musk mentioned future plans to launch Starship from Florida's Space Coast, during an interaction with a Twitter user, who asked if SpaceX would launch Starlink satellites atop Starship from Launch Complex 39A, at the Kennedy Space Center. After several successful launches, land overflight earlier in trajectory passes E-sub-C safety threshold. That said, Starship will also launch from Cape Canaveral long-term, Musk said in response, in reference to certain missions that would require Starship to fly above land. The E-sub-C safety threshold is the expected casualty analysis, the launch industry's fundamental method for assessing risk. According to the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, the safety threshold states that in order for a vehicle to fly above populated land, it should have a no greater than 30 in a million probability of casualty among the uninvolved public on the ground. Long-term, SpaceX plans to build a Starship launch tower in Florida to support Starship flights. Not only will Starship help with making life multiplanetary, the company also envisions using the spacecraft to transport passengers and cargo to point-to-point destinations on Earth. For now, SpaceX teams are focused on completing its first Super Heavy class launch tower at Boca Chica Beach. The launch tower will be 143 meters tall, 469 feet, to support Super Heavy rocket launches. Boca Chica photographers have shared photos of SpaceX's tower construction progress. The company targets to complete the launch tower this summer. If approved by the FAA, SpaceX plans to conduct the first orbital Starship flight test from South Texas. The vehicle would lift off to orbit, then re-enter Earth's atmosphere to land in the ocean, approximately 100 kilometers off the northwest coast of Hawaii. This flight path would only cross above the ocean, over the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic, along the Florida Straits. Thanks for watching this video, and it's a super interesting topic. If you like this, make sure to subscribe. If you have any crazy ideas about what we should cover in next video, please comment it below, and we'll see if we can get to it. So thanks again for watching and goodbye.